The flight was supposed to be just another business trip, another long flight between Washington, D.C. and an international military base. For Naomi Carrington, a general in the U.S. Army, travel was routine. But this flight, this moment, would change everything. Naomi sat in her first-class seat, her posture straight, her eyes focused on the window. The world below seemed distant, but her mind was always sharp, always prepared for whatever came next. She'd led troops in battle, negotiated with allies, and made decisions that affected the lives of thousands. Nothing in her career had ever thrown her off balance. Not until now. As she glanced down at her phone, a ping from the Pentagon briefly distracted her. Her meeting at the base was crucial, but she had a few moments before landing. That's when she saw the young flight attendant walking toward her. Naomi barely registered the girl's presence until she stopped directly in front of her. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant said, her voice tight, almost dismissive. "I don't see your name on the list for first class." Naomi's gaze shifted to meet the girl's. "I'm General Naomi Carrington," she said calmly, already reaching for her ID and travel papers. "I've booked a first-class seat. I can show you my documents." But the flight attendant didn't even take a second to look at the papers. Instead, she let out a sigh, almost as if Naomi were an inconvenience. "I think you understand that first class isn't exactly meant for everyone," she said, her tone condescending. "I'll have to double-check your seating." Naomi's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. Her patience was legendary, forged through years of leading soldiers in war zones. But now, something else was building up inside her. She could feel the slow burn of injustice. Naomi had faced much worse in her life, but this was different. This wasn't just about being a military leader. It was personal. She remained calm as the attendant walked away, and Naomi didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, the fire of frustration still simmering inside her. She didn't need to defend herself. Not to this flight attendant. But Naomi had learned long ago that the real battle was often fought in silence. She quietly pulled out her phone and sent a message to the Pentagon. "Obstructed on flight. Request immediate assistance." As Naomi composed herself, the attendant returned, this time with a more insistent air. Before Naomi could even respond, the attendant slapped her across the face, hard, shocking Naomi to her core. Time seemed to freeze. The pain of the slap was nothing compared to the sting of humiliation. Naomi's eyes locked with the flight attendant's, but she didn't react. Not a word, not a movement. The flight attendant looked at her, smugly satisfied, as the eyes of the passengers in the cabin flicked between them. Naomi's heart was pounding, but she controlled the urge to strike back. Instead, she calmly placed her phone on the tray in front of her, resting her hands on her lap. Every instinct told her to rise up, to fight back. But Naomi knew better. She wouldn't let them see her break. Without a word, she reached for her phone once again, this time more deliberately. With a steady hand, she dialed the number she knew would get results. The world outside might not understand yet, but Naomi Carrington wasn't the kind of woman who would let a single moment define her. And with a single call, she was going to make sure the world knew just how powerful her silence could be. The phone rang once, twice, and then it clicked. "Pentagon Command, General Carrington," came the voice on the other end. Naomi's voice remained even. "I am requesting the immediate suspension of the airline's $2 billion military contract," she said, her tone unwavering. "I've just been personally obstructed by one of your employees. I need this addressed immediately." On the other end, there was a brief pause, then a rush of activity. This was no ordinary call. The attendant, still standing by Naomi's seat, had no idea what she'd just triggered. In that one moment, Naomi had gone from victim to victor. She had turned the tables, not with anger, but with strategic power. Naomi wasn't just a general. She was a force to be reckoned with. And the world, as it would soon discover, was about to change because of her. Naomi kept her phone pressed to her ear as she listened to the Pentagon officer on the other end. The tension in her body was palpable, but her voice remained steady, calm, almost eerily controlled. This wasn't the first time she'd found herself in a situation like this, where the powers that be hadn't respected her position, her identity, or her rights. But it was the first time that she could feel, deep in her gut, that the world was going to change because of her next move. "General Carrington, we've received your message," the officer said. His voice was professional, but Naomi could hear the undertone of urgency. "We've already initiated contact with the airline's corporate office. We're going to freeze the contract, but we need you to stay calm and gather all relevant information. This could escalate quickly, and we need to make sure we handle this properly." Naomi's grip tightened on the phone. She knew this could escalate, but what she hadn't expected was just how much power a single call could wield. She let out a slow breath, trying to keep the frustration at bay. Her patience had already been tested to the limit, but she understood how delicate these situations were. At least she wasn't fighting this alone anymore. She was used to going to battle on her own terms, but now the force of her decision was rippling outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. The flight attendant's actions weren't just an isolated incident. They were part of a larger problem Naomi had seen time and time again. Systematic disrespect, especially toward those who didn't fit the image of what others expected. Naomi scanned the cabin, the passengers all shifting in their seats. Some of them were still eyeing her with curiosity, some with pity. She didn't want their pity. She wanted justice. But in that moment, Naomi realized that her actions were going to do more than right a wrong in a small corner of the world. They were going to spark a fire, and fires spread. "General, please ensure you stay where you are until we have backup on the way. We'll need a full report from you once you land. The immediate actions we're taking are aimed at freezing their $2 billion military contract. Those actions have been set in motion, but we're looking into every aspect of this situation. The higher-ups want this handled swiftly and quietly, but we will not back down," the officer continued. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of his words. The reality was setting in. This wasn't just an issue with one airline. This was bigger, much bigger. She had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would reach into places she hadn't even imagined yet. The game was changing. She took a deep breath and nodded, even though the officer couldn't see her. "Understood. I'll keep my position here, but make no mistake. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been made to feel less than. This isn't over." Before the officer could respond, Naomi ended the call and slowly placed her phone back on the tray table. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the cabin on her. The moment she'd been dreading had arrived. She was no longer just a soldier. She was a symbol of resilience, of standing up to systems that had long been broken. A few minutes passed in silence as Naomi sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't speak, didn't make eye contact with anyone around her. Her mind was racing, and she could feel the storm within her building, but she didn't let it show. There was still much to be done, much more than she had ever bargained for. From the corner of her eye, she saw the flight attendants gathering at the front of the cabin, whispering among themselves. It was clear that the incident had set the wheels in motion, but Naomi knew better than anyone. This was only the beginning. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she also knew that nothing would be the same again. Not for her, and certainly not for the airline. Naomi wasn't going to let this stand, not for a second longer. She had worked too hard, fought too long, and sacrificed too much to be humiliated like this in public. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how personal it had become. This wasn't just about an isolated act of disrespect. It was about the deep-rooted inequality she'd seen in every part of society, in the military, in civilian life, everywhere. Her mind was made up. She wasn't going to let the system get away with this. Not now, not ever. But Naomi had learned long ago that anger, though a powerful motivator, was a dangerous ally. She needed to channel her frustration into something far more effective, something that would leave a lasting impact. Naomi glanced out of the window at the clouds passing by. For a moment, everything was still. The turbulence of the flight had settled. But inside, Naomi could feel the storm brewing again. She wasn't going to let this moment slip by. She wasn't going to let it go unpunished. Just then, she heard the loudspeaker crackle to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be beginning our descent into our final destination shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Naomi straightened in her seat, her thoughts still swirling. As the plane began its descent, she knew that when it landed, everything would change. Her phone buzzed again, and she picked it up quickly. Another message from the Pentagon officer. She read it, then pressed her lips together in a tight line. "General, we've confirmed the suspension of the $2 billion military contract. We'll be releasing the full report and taking further action. Please remain composed upon landing. We are prepared for any backlash." The officer's message confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just about a single moment of discrimination. This was about systemic problems that needed to be addressed head-on. Naomi had already begun the process, but now it was going to escalate. She could only hope that the wheels she'd set in motion would not be too difficult to control. As the plane touched down, Naomi felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had done what she had to do. There would be consequences, there always were, but she was ready. Ready for what was coming next. Ready for the fight. When the plane came to a halt, Naomi took one last, steadying breath. She knew what awaited her on the other side. The press, the questions, the scrutiny. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was what she would do next. The door to the plane opened, and Naomi stepped out into the terminal. The world outside was waiting for her, but so was the moment of truth. Naomi sat still in her seat, her hand clasped tightly together in her lap. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, but she refused to look around. She knew all eyes were on her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. But she wasn't here for their approval. She wasn't here to explain herself. This was bigger than her, bigger than the incident, bigger than the flight attendant. She had just made the call to the Pentagon, and things were already starting to change. There was no going back now. The plane was descending, and she could feel the weight of it. Her fingers gripped the armrest, and for a brief moment, she let her mind wander. What was going to happen next? Would they back her up? Would the situation spiral out of control? Naomi was used to being in charge, used to leading with confidence. But this was something different. She had taken a step that could either make or break everything she'd worked for. She thought of the military careers she'd built, the lives she'd commanded, the allies she'd forged. What if this was the moment that tested everything? The hum of the plane's engines cut through her thoughts as the plane touched down smoothly on the runway. The familiar landing procedure, something Naomi had done 1,000 times, seemed almost surreal now. She had been on the receiving end of that slap not even an hour ago, and now she was about to face the aftermath. As the plane rolled to a stop, Naomi stood up, straightened her jacket, and grabbed her small bag. No time to second guess. She had come this far. Now she had to move forward. No hesitation, no regrets. As soon as the plane door opened, Naomi felt the cool air of the terminal hit her face. She was met by the usual bustle of the airport, passengers collecting their bags, the hum of announcements overhead, the clatter of footsteps against the tiled floor. But none of that registered to Naomi. Her focus was razor sharp. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the person everyone would be talking about. Whether they knew her name yet or not, they would know her soon. Before she could step further, a familiar face appeared in front of her. A Pentagon liaison she'd worked with before. Lieutenant Colonel Darren Mosley, mid-40s, a sharp-eyed man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He'd been briefed on Naomi's situation the moment her call had come through. "General," Mosley said, his voice low but urgent. "We've already got eyes on the airline. Our intel is coming in hot, and the media is catching wind of it. We need to move quickly." Naomi nodded, her jaw set in determination. "I don't need anyone to hold my hand, Colonel. I just need to do what I came here to do." Mosley glanced over his shoulder, where a small group of military security personnel stood, ready to escort her. "Understood, General. Just don't get caught up in the noise. This could get bigger than we expected." As they walked toward the exit, Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing down at the message from her assistant back at the Pentagon. "Media's already got hold of the story. The first headlines are running. They're calling it a high-profile military scandal. The CEO of the airline is set to issue a statement. They've pulled $200 million in investments. It's just the beginning." Naomi's lips tightened as she read the message. She had been expecting this. The media was relentless, especially when it came to a story involving a black woman in power. But this wasn't about the media circus. This was about making a statement. The ripple effect from her call was already reverberating through the financial sector, shaking the foundations of the airline and the military contracts they held. She hadn't just made a call for herself. She had sent a message to anyone who thought they could ignore her, and anyone who thought they could get away with disrespecting those who were in positions of power. As she stepped into the waiting SUV, Naomi felt a weight settle over her. She wasn't just the one who had been wronged anymore. This was about the greater system, the one that had allowed things like this to happen. It was time to make sure the people responsible paid the price, not just for what they did to her, but for the countless others who'd been humiliated, marginalized, or mistreated. The car sped through the streets toward the military base where she was set to meet with high-ranking officials. The reality of what she'd set in motion was becoming clearer with every passing second. Naomi knew this fight would cost her, but it was a fight she was ready for. She glanced out the window as the city blurred by, the noise and distractions fading into the background. For the first time since the slap, Naomi allowed herself to process what had happened. The anger that had boiled in her chest had cooled, replaced by a steady resolve. She wasn't angry anymore. She was determined. This wasn't just about her. This was about the future. When they arrived at the base, Naomi was quickly ushered into a secured conference room. The walls were lined with monitors, some showing live news feeds, others filled with classified documents. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was aware of the gravity of the situation, and Naomi could feel it. Her assistant handed her a tablet with the latest updates from the media. The headlines were already trending. General Naomi Carrington's injustice flight sparks global backlash. One of the top stories read. Another headline, Airline's $2 billion defense contract suspended amid racism claims. Naomi didn't flinch. This was only the beginning. Colonel Mosley stepped up to her side, scanning the news. "This is bigger than we thought. The airline's losing its grip, and the government contractors are starting to pull their funding. It's spreading fast." Naomi's eyes narrowed. Good. Let them feel the consequences of their actions. As the meeting with Pentagon officials began, Naomi's mind raced. She was being briefed on the next steps, what legal actions would be taken against the airline, and what measures the military would take to ensure such incidents wouldn't happen again. But Naomi wasn't here for a quick fix. She knew better than anyone that this wasn't just an isolated event. It was a symptom of a deeper problem in the system. And if she was going to make a real change, she needed to take down more than just one airline. Her voice cut through the meeting. "We need a full audit of the airline's entire contract network," Naomi said, her words sharp. "Not just the military deals, but the commercial contracts, the partnerships they have with other government agencies. We start there." Her words landed with the force of a hammer, and the room fell silent for a moment. They knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't just about punishing one corporation, it was about making an example of them, sending a message that no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, could escape the consequences of their actions. Naomi leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Her mind was already calculating the next move. There was a lot more at stake now, and she wasn't going to stop until the entire system had been forced to reckon with its own flaws. She looked up at the Pentagon officials. "This is only the beginning. We take down one, and the rest will follow." Naomi stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The view outside the window was calm, serene, almost the kind of sight that would make anyone feel at ease. But Naomi wasn't here to feel comforted. She wasn't here for peace. She was here to make sure that everything she had set in motion would have the impact it was meant to. She had always known that making waves would have consequences, but nothing had prepared her for the scale of the storm she had just created. The moment she'd picked up the phone in the cabin and made that call, it had triggered a cascade of events that would shake the very foundation of the airline and the military-industrial complex. The plane had landed, and Naomi had been whisked away to a secured military base, away from the prying eyes of the media. The military officials were already in a flurry of activity, their phones buzzing with updates as the situation developed. Naomi could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't let it show. Her posture remained straight, her expression calm, though internally, her mind was a whirlwind of strategy. She had acted decisively, but she also knew that the harder part was still ahead. A few hours earlier, Naomi had been just another general, leading a quiet mission. But now, her name was trending on every major news outlet. The headlines were already being plastered across every newsday, and Naomi knew that soon, the media would descend upon her like vultures. The headlines blared in her mind, one after another. General Naomi Carrington exposes $2 billion airline scandal. Military contracts frozen as allegations of racism rock major airline. One call shakes the entire aviation industry. Naomi took a deep breath and steeled herself. She wasn't here for the fame, the media frenzy, or even the attention. She was here because she had seen a system that was broken, and she was determined to do something about it. When she finally stepped into the briefing room, the atmosphere was tense. Pentagon officials, military strategists, and legal advisors were all gathered around the table. The room fell silent the moment Naomi walked in. There was no need for grand introductions or pleasantries. Everyone knew who she was. She was the one who had just sent a ripple through the entire defense and airline industries. Naomi took her seat at the head of the table, her eyes scanning the faces around her. They were all waiting for her to speak, for her to give them direction. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. "General Carrington," said Colonel Mosley, his voice calm, but with a hint of urgency. "We've confirmed the suspension of the $2 billion military contract with the airline. Our intelligence is already making the rounds, and we're preparing to freeze several of their commercial contracts as well. This is going to hit them hard." Naomi nodded, but her expression didn't change. She wasn't here to talk numbers. She was here to finish what she had started. "I didn't make that call just to freeze a contract," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "This goes beyond a single company. This is about sending a message to every corporation and government agency that thinks they can get away with this kind of behavior." Her words hung in the air for a moment as the others processed what she was saying. Naomi wasn't just fighting for her own dignity. She was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, dismissed, or mistreated simply because of the color of their skin. "General, the financial fallout is already beginning. Our contacts at the airline's financial partners are reporting significant losses. Shares are plummeting. This could be a lot bigger than just the airline itself," said Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hanley, a Pentagon officer who had been coordinating the operation from Washington. Naomi didn't flinch. "Good. Let it crash. It's about time the entire system felt the weight of its own corruption." The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Naomi knew that she wasn't just starting a legal and financial battle. She was sparking a larger conversation about race, power, and accountability in industries that had long turned a blind eye to the marginalized. Naomi glanced at the monitors on the wall, which were now displaying live news footage. The incident had gone viral. Social media was ablaze with the story. Naomi's face appeared on every major news outlet. The camera angles, the interviews, the commentary, it was all directed at her. But Naomi didn't care about the media circus. She cared about the bigger picture. "General," Mosley said, breaking the silence. "The investigation is moving quickly. The airline is already under scrutiny from several government agencies. There's talk of a federal inquiry into their entire operation. But we're going to need you to stay focused. The backlash is coming, and we need to be prepared." Naomi looked at him, her eyes hard as steel. "I'm not afraid of backlash. What I'm afraid of is that nothing will change, that this will all be brushed aside like it always is. We need to ensure that this isn't just a headline for the week. We need real reform. I won't stop until it happens." The meeting continued for hours, the discussion moving from one strategic detail to the next. The fallout from Naomi's call was already spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The airline was hemorrhaging money, the stock market was reacting negatively, and the corporate and government sectors were scrambling to assess the full scope of the damage. As the meeting came to a close, Naomi stood up and gathered her things. The work was far from done, but the wheels were in motion. This was only the beginning. "General," Mosley said as she was about to leave the room, his voice filled with respect, "I just want to say, what you've done today, it's historic. You've set a precedent, and there are people watching. But you've also made some powerful enemies. Be prepared for the fight of your life." Naomi turned to face him, her expression as calm as ever. "I've faced worse," she said simply. "But this time, I'm fighting for something bigger than me." As Naomi left the room, she could feel the weight of her decision. This was no longer just about her career or her personal struggle. She had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. The system she had fought so hard to be a part of had failed her, and she was going to make sure it didn't fail anyone else again. As Naomi left the Pentagon building, the world outside was already changing. The news cycles were filled with commentary about her, and social media was lighting up with hashtags and posts calling for justice and reform. Naomi knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that the battle she had started was far from over. Naomi stood in front of the large glass windows, staring out at the city. The bright lights of Washington, D.C. twinkled in the distance, but in her mind, there was nothing but the stillness of the moment. She'd done it. She had set the wheels in motion for something much bigger than herself. The battle had only just begun, but Naomi knew this would be a defining moment. In the hours since her call to the Pentagon, the world had started to take notice. Headlines were flashing across the media like wildfire, and the public was in an uproar. Social media was ablaze with posts, comments, and hashtags demanding justice. Naomi's name was everywhere, but it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the countless others who had been subjected to the same kind of discrimination, the same kind of mistreatment. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her, snapping Naomi out of her thoughts. She picked it up and read the message from her assistant. "General, we've received confirmation from multiple sources. Global backlash is growing. The airline has lost over $2 billion in investment since yesterday. The CEO has stepped down, and a full investigation has been launched by the Department of Justice. This is bigger than we anticipated." Naomi couldn't help but feel a tightness in her chest. It was working. Everything she had set into motion was causing ripples that reached further than she had imagined. But the cost was steep. Naomi was already preparing herself for what came next. She knew the consequences of her actions wouldn't just affect the airline. They would affect her too. A knock at the door broke her reverie. She turned, expecting it to be one of the military aides. But instead, it was Colonel Mosley, his face tight with concern. "General," he began, stepping into the room, "the media is going wild. They're calling it the biggest scandal in aviation history. The airline's board is in disarray, and we're getting pressure from Congress to respond. There are even rumors about political fallout. People in Washington are looking for someone to blame." Naomi turned to face him, her expression unchanged. "Let them look," she replied coolly. "What they should be looking at is the system that allowed this to happen." Mosley paused, clearly waiting for her to elaborate. But Naomi had said all she needed to say. She wasn't interested in the media circus or the political games. She had a bigger goal in mind. They can't stop this now, she continued, her voice firm. The damage is done. What we need to do next is ensure it doesn't happen again. Later that day, Naomi found herself sitting in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, surrounded by high-ranking officials, advisors, and legal teams. There was a quiet hum of activity as everyone prepared for what would likely be the most significant press conference of Naomi's career. But this meeting wasn't just about answering questions, it was about planning the next steps in her fight for justice. Naomi felt the weight of the room, the collective expectation pressing down on her. The media had made her the face of the controversy, but Naomi wasn't here for applause. She was here to make sure the message was clear. This wasn't a one-time fight. This was the beginning of a much larger movement. Colonel Mosley stood at the head of the table, the room falling silent as he prepared to brief everyone. General Carrington's actions have set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. We've already seen $2 billion in frozen investments, but this is just the beginning. We are coordinating with the Department of Justice to ensure the investigation into the airline's financial dealings and discriminatory practices goes beyond just public relations. This is about holding corporations accountable. Naomi nodded in agreement. Exactly. But we can't stop there. I don't want this to be just about them. This is about all of us. About everyone who's been denied their seat at the table because of the color of their skin. It's about making sure that every system that discriminates is held accountable. It's time to change how things are done, not just with this airline, but across the board. Her words hung in the air for a moment, and she could feel the weight of her own conviction. This was bigger than one corporation. This was about reshaping the system at its core, one brick at a time. As the meeting concluded, Naomi was escorted back to her quarters, where her mind remained restless, still processing everything that had happened. The investigation was just getting started, but Naomi knew that the political firestorm that was building would be difficult to weather. She would be the target, and there would be people eager to tear her down. But she was ready. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her assistant. She unlocked the screen and read, "General, the news is exploding. Not just about the airline, but about the broader implications. Congress is calling for hearings. Several prominent civil rights leaders are joining the cause. Some are even suggesting the creation of a new regulatory body to oversee racial equality in corporate practices." Naomi allowed herself a small smile. This was it. The beginning of something much bigger. She wasn't just fighting for one moment of personal justice. She was fighting for a lasting change. Hours later, the time came for the press conference. Naomi stood at the podium, her full military uniform shining in the bright lights. She stood tall, her posture strong, unwavering. She had been through battles before, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a war for equality. The media horde surrounded her, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Naomi took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. She could feel the weight of their eyes, the world watching. But she wasn't fazed. This was her moment. "My name is General Naomi Carrington," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "I have spent 29 years serving this country, leading soldiers, advising presidents, and defending the ideals written into the Constitution." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "Yesterday, in Mosswood, Louisiana, none of that mattered. I was judged not by the content of my character, not by the uniform I've earned, but by the color of my skin." The room was dead silent as Naomi's words echoed. She could feel the impact they were having, the truth ringing clear in the hearts of everyone present. She continued, "I'm not here today for an apology. I'm here because silence is not an option. Accountability matters, respect matters, human dignity matters, and none of these are negotiable based on someone's prejudice or ignorance." As she spoke, Naomi could see the faces in the crowd. Some were angry, others hopeful, but all of them were waiting for something they hadn't seen enough of lately: real leadership. "Justice is not new," Naomi finished, "but change only happens when enough people refuse to look away. I was not humiliated yesterday. They were. and history will remember it that way. With that, Naomi stepped away from the microphone. She didn't need to say anything more. The applause started slowly at first, but then it grew, louder and more powerful. Naomi didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the crowd. She simply turned and walked out of the room, her head held high. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of activity. Naomi Carrington, once just a name in the military, was now a household name. Every corner of the media landscape had picked up her story, spinning it into a narrative that was both a battle for personal dignity and a fight for justice on a much larger scale. She had spoken out against the discrimination she faced in that moment on the airplane. But what she had really ignited was a movement that was sweeping across the country. The financial repercussions were undeniable. The airline had lost billions in contracts. Its stock value was plummeting, and investors were pulling out left and right. But those were just the numbers. The real change was happening in the hearts and minds of people everywhere. Naomi had taken the first step, and now the world was watching to see if the dominoes would continue to fall. Naomi sat in her office at the Pentagon, her back straight as she watched the latest news reports on the television. She was used to the buzz of media attention. She had spent years under the spotlight, commanding respect on the battlefield. But this felt different. This wasn't a war she was fighting with bullets and strategy. It was a war for dignity, equality, and justice. Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. She glanced down at the caller ID and saw the name of a civil rights leader she'd worked with on previous initiatives, Allison Ward. Naomi answered immediately. "General Carrington." Allison's voice came through, urgent and filled with respect. "I don't need to tell you how big this is. The momentum you've created is incredible, but we need to keep pushing. We can't stop here." Naomi leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly against the surface of her desk. "What's happening on the ground?" Allison sighed, the weight of her words apparent. "We've got protests in major cities now. People are rallying for change, demanding justice, but the pressure is also starting to build on the politicians. They're worried about the optics. Some are already trying to distance themselves from the situation, but others are calling for hearings." Naomi nodded, her mind already calculating the next step. "We need more than protests. We need concrete action. We need new policies, new regulations, and we need to hold the people responsible accountable, not just the airline." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you suggesting something bigger?" Naomi's voice was steady, unwavering. "It's time for a national conversation about systemic racism in corporations, and it starts with the airline industry. We make sure they know this is just the beginning." As Naomi spoke, a sense of resolve began to settle in her. She had already called the shots that made headlines, but this fight was going to be longer and more grueling than she had anticipated. This wasn't just a personal victory. This was about changing the system itself. The legal team at the Pentagon had already started reviewing the airline's financial dealings, and Naomi had ordered a full audit. She wasn't going to stop until the full extent of the airline's corrupt practices was exposed. Racism wasn't just a part of the system, it was embedded in it. But there were still obstacles. Powerful people in Washington were quietly maneuvering behind the scenes, trying to discredit Naomi's actions and redirect the conversation. They would try to reduce the entire scandal to one isolated incident, a single mistake. But Naomi wasn't going to let that happen. "Allison," she said after a moment, "I want a press conference in the next 24 hours. I'll be addressing the nation again, and I want every media outlet there. This time, it's not just about the airline. It's about everyone who has been discriminated against. Everyone who's been told they don't belong." The next day, Naomi stood before a packed room of journalists, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in her face. The energy in the room was electric. There was a palpable tension. Everyone knew this wasn't just another press conference. This was Naomi Carrington's moment to solidify her place in history, to take this fight to the next level. She walked up to the podium with a calm, measured step. Her military uniform gleamed in the light. every detail a reflection of her disciplined approach. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. This wasn't about speaking to her enemies. This was about speaking to the people who were finally beginning to realize that change was possible. "Thank you all for being here," Naomi began, her voice cutting through the noise of the room. "I'm not here today to talk about myself or the airline. I'm here because we are at a crossroads in this country. We are at a moment in time where the status quo is no longer acceptable. And I'm here to tell you that I will not stop until we see real, lasting change." The room fell silent as Naomi continued. "We've seen the financial fallout from the actions of one airline. But this isn't about one company. This is about a systemic problem that goes beyond corporate greed. It's about racism that has been allowed to persist for far too long. And it's time for that to end." Her words were met with a wave of applause. Naomi could feel the energy shift in the room. This wasn't just about her fight anymore. It was about something much bigger. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "The airline industry is just the beginning. We are going to hold every corporation accountable. We are going to demand that every company operating in this country adheres to strict regulations around racial equality and diversity. We need to stop treating people differently based on the color of their skin." The applause grew louder. Naomi's resolve was unshakable, and the public could see it. She wasn't just making a statement. She was starting a movement. As Naomi left the press conference, she could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The media frenzy was growing, but it was nothing compared to the tidal wave of change she was about to ride. She had already made her mark, but now she had to keep pushing. Back at the Pentagon, the legal team was preparing for the next phase. The airline's financial ties were being investigated, and Naomi was determined to see it through. She wasn't just going to stop at an apology or a few policy changes. She was going to reshape the entire system. As the weeks passed, Naomi's plan began to take shape. The airline was forced into a full investigation, and the company's practices were laid bare for the world to see. What had started as a slap in the face had become a slap in the face to the entire system. Naomi wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for a revolution. Naomi Carrington's life had never been simple, but the last few weeks had turned everything upside down. What started as a moment of personal humiliation had spiraled into a nationwide reckoning, and she was now the face of a movement that demanded accountability from the very systems that were designed to protect the powerful. She was no longer just a general in the military. She was a symbol of strength, defiance, and, above all, change. But with power came responsibility, and with responsibility came opposition. As Naomi sat in her office at the Pentagon, she watched the news with a sense of detached curiosity. The headlines had evolved from shock to something else: outrage. While many rallied behind her, some voices in Washington and beyond were starting to turn against her. The blowback was inevitable, she knew. Change was always met with resistance, especially from those who stood to lose the most from that change. Her phone buzzed, cutting through her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Allison Ward, the civil rights leader who had stood by her since the beginning of this battle. Naomi picked up the phone without hesitation. "Naomi," Allison's voice came through, firm but tinged with urgency. "I don't know if you've seen the latest reports, but some of the politicians are making moves to discredit you. They're trying to paint you as a political pawn in all of this. They're calling you a radical, even a threat to national security. The media's feeding into it, the pressure's mounting." Naomi's jaw tightened as she listened. "I knew this would happen," she said, her voice steady despite the simmering anger. "They can call me whatever they want, Allison. The truth is undeniable. They're scared because we're finally forcing the conversation they've been avoiding for years." Allison was silent for a beat before responding. "This is bigger than just you and the media narrative, Naomi. Some of the people you've worked with before are starting to pull back. Some military and political figures are distancing themselves from you, afraid of the fallout. It's like they're trying to weaken your position before you even get a chance to fully leverage it." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of Allison's words sink in. She had prepared herself for the backlash, but hearing it out loud made the reality feel that much heavier. Political games were already being played behind closed doors. Naomi could already feel the walls closing in. She had no intention of backing down. "We can't afford to let them divide us," Naomi said, her voice stronger now. "I've come too far, and I won't let them undermine this fight. Let them say what they want. I'm here for the long haul." That afternoon, Naomi found herself in a closed-door meeting with several high-ranking officials in Washington. The stakes had never been higher. The room was filled with the top brass, advisors, and lawyers. Everyone was on edge, unsure of how to proceed in the wake of Naomi's viral confrontation with the airline. But Naomi wasn't here to feel their doubt. She was here to set the record straight and keep her foot on the gas. Colonel Mosley, who had become one of her most trusted allies in the Pentagon, leaned forward in his chair, looking at Naomi. His face was grim, but there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "The airline industry is just the beginning. We are going to hold every corporation accountable. We are going to demand that every company operating in this country adheres to strict regulations around racial equality and diversity. We need to stop treating people differently based on the color of their skin." The applause grew louder. Naomi's resolve was unshakable, and the public could see it. She wasn't just making a statement. She was starting a movement. As Naomi left the press conference, she could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The media frenzy was growing, but it was nothing compared to the tidal wave of change she was about to ride. She had already made her mark, but now she had to keep pushing. Back at the Pentagon, the legal team was preparing for the next phase. The airline's financial ties were being investigated, and Naomi was determined to see it through. She wasn't just going to stop at an apology or a few policy changes. She was going to reshape the entire system. As the weeks passed, Naomi's plan began to take shape. The airline was forced into a full investigation, and the company's practices were laid bare for the world to see. What had started as a slap in the face had become a slap in the face to the entire system. Naomi wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for a revolution. Naomi Carrington's life had never been simple, but the last few weeks had turned everything upside down. What started as a moment of personal humiliation had spiraled into a nationwide reckoning, and she was now the face of a movement that demanded accountability from the very systems that were designed to protect the powerful. She was no longer just a general in the military. She was a symbol of strength, defiance, and, above all, change. But with power came responsibility, and with responsibility came opposition. As Naomi sat in her office at the Pentagon, she watched the news with a sense of detached curiosity. The headlines had evolved from shock to something else: outrage. While many rallied behind her, some voices in Washington and beyond were starting to turn against her. The blowback was inevitable, she knew. Change was always met with resistance, especially from those who stood to lose the most from that change. Her phone buzzed, cutting through her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Allison Ward, the civil rights leader who had stood by her since the beginning of this battle. Naomi picked up the phone without hesitation. "Naomi," Allison's voice came through, firm but tinged with urgency. "I don't know if you've seen the latest reports, but some of the politicians are making moves to discredit you. They're trying to paint you as a political pawn in all of this. They're calling you a radical, even a threat to national security. The media's feeding into it. The pressure's mounting." Naomi's jaw tightened as she listened. "I knew this would happen," she said, her voice steady despite the simmering anger. "They can call me whatever they want, Allison. The truth is undeniable. They're scared because we're finally forcing the conversation they've been avoiding for years." Allison was silent for a beat before responding. "This is bigger than just you and the media narrative, Naomi. Some of the people you've worked with before are starting to pull back. Some military and political figures are distancing themselves from you, afraid of the fallout. It's like they're trying to weaken your position before you even get a chance to fully leverage it." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of Allison's words sink in. She had prepared herself for the backlash. But hearing it out loud made the reality feel that much heavier. Political games were already being played behind closed doors. Naomi could already feel the walls closing in. She had no intention of backing down. "We can't afford to let them divide us," Naomi said, her voice stronger now. "I've come too far, and I won't let them undermine this fight. Let them say what they want. I'm here for the long haul." That afternoon, Naomi found herself in a closed-door meeting with several high-ranking officials in Washington. The stakes had never been higher. The room was filled with the top brass, advisors, and lawyers. Everyone was on edge, unsure of how to proceed in the wake of Naomi's viral confrontation with the airline. But Naomi wasn't here to feel their doubt. She was here to set the record straight and keep her foot on the gas. Colonel Mosley, who had become one of her most trusted allies in the Pentagon, leaned forward in his chair, looking at Naomi. His face was grim, but there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. "General," he began, "the situation is escalating. On one hand, the investigation is progressing, and some of the airline's top executives are facing potential criminal charges. But on the other hand, there's pressure from some powerful senators to scale back the investigation. They're not exactly thrilled with how you've made this public, and some of them are pushing for the military to distance itself from you." Naomi didn't flinch. She had known that this was coming, but hearing it from Mosley made it feel real. She had already become a lightning rod for controversy, and now the political fallout was threatening to derail everything she had worked for. "You think I care about their opinions?" Naomi asked, her voice low but firm. "We're doing the right thing, and if they can't handle the truth, then let them backpedal. We're not backing down, Colonel. Not now, not ever." The room was silent for a moment. Everyone in the room knew the stakes. Naomi's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was at risk. But Naomi wasn't looking for sympathy or approval. She was a force, and those who doubted her would learn quickly that she wouldn't be so easily swayed. After the meeting, Naomi returned to her office. She had a lot on her plate. The investigation into the airline was ramping up, and the media frenzy had become almost impossible to manage. There was a persistent pressure, not just from her political adversaries, but from her own allies as well. Some were urging her to tone it down, to ease off the gas and allow things to settle. Others were warning her that the political landscape had changed. Naomi didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen and saw a name she hadn't expected to see: Admiral Lucas Grant. The Admiral was one of Naomi's old mentors, someone who had supported her early on in her military career. They hadn't spoken in a while, and Naomi couldn't help but wonder what he wanted now. "Admiral," Naomi said, her tone respectful but cautious. "What can I do for you?" "Naomi," Grant's voice was deep and steady, "I've been watching everything unfold, and I need you to understand something. The people behind this pushback, the ones who want to discredit you, they're more powerful than you think. You've stirred up a hornet's nest. You're going to need more than just legal battles and public speeches to win this. You're going to need allies on the inside." Naomi was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. She had always respected the Admiral's wisdom, but she didn't have the luxury of relying on others to secure her victory. She needed to act decisively. Still, Grant's advice wasn't lost on her. "I appreciate the warning, Admiral," Naomi said, "but I've already made my move. Now, I'm not going to back off. I'll need your support, but I'm not waiting for anyone to step in. This fight belongs to all of us, and if we don't act now, we'll lose." The Admiral sighed. "I understand. Just be careful. The road ahead is dangerous, and not everyone will have your back." As Naomi hung up the phone, she was reminded of why she had become who she was. She wasn't just fighting for her own dignity. She was fighting for the systemic change that had eluded so many. And while the opposition was strong, Naomi was determined to keep pushing forward. But her resolve wasn't just about the fight. It was about showing others that it was possible to stand up against the odds, to face down adversity, and still come out on top. Naomi knew that she wasn't just fighting for the rights of one person. but for everyone who had ever been discriminated against or silenced. The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and constant updates. Naomi had become a symbol of resistance, and the world was watching. Her every move was being scrutinized, and the media, ever hungry for the next story, was circling like vultures. But Naomi had learned long ago that media storms were just that, fleeting. What mattered was what she did in the long term, how she used this moment to force real, lasting change. By the end of the week, the pressure was at an all-time high. The senators who had once distanced themselves from Naomi were now circling back, trying to take credit for her actions. She was becoming a political tool in their game, but Naomi wasn't having it. "I didn't get into this fight to be anyone's pawn," Naomi said, slamming her fist onto the desk as she spoke to her team. "This isn't about political posturing. This is about justice, and I'll be damned if they try to twist it into something else." Her team nodded in agreement. They knew what was at stake, and they weren't backing down either. The days after Naomi Carrington's press conference had been a blur of media coverage, strategic meetings, and unexpected twists. What had started as a personal battle against an unjust incident had escalated into a war, one where the stakes were much higher than she had initially. Everywhere she went, people were watching. The press, the politicians, the public. Everyone had an opinion. Some called her a hero, others a radical. Naomi didn't care about their labels. She knew that the real fight was just beginning. And it wasn't just about the airline anymore. It was about changing the system that had allowed this kind of discrimination to thrive in the first place. In the Pentagon, Naomi sat across from her team, her eyes focused on the digital map of the ongoing investigation. The airline's financial holdings, their government contracts, and the internal communications that had been leaked. Everything was on the table now. The truth was coming to light. And the more they uncovered, the more Naomi realized that this wasn't just about one airline. This was a glimpse into a much larger issue, one that touched every corner of corporate America. "General," Mosley said, breaking Naomi from her thoughts. He stood by the large screen, pointing to the data streaming in front of him. "The leaks are coming faster now. More and more financial backers are pulling out, and we're getting information about the airline's links to several key political figures. We're not just dealing with corporate greed here. This is deep." Naomi leaned forward, her hand clasped tightly on the table. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The walls were crumbling, and she could feel the power shifting. But Naomi knew that this wouldn't be enough. The change couldn't just be a ripple. It had to be a tidal wave. She had to make sure that no one could ever get away with this again. "Keep digging," Naomi said, her voice calm but commanding. "We need every detail. Who's been involved, who's been silenced, who's been complicit. And then we make sure this goes all the way to the top." As Mosley nodded and the team got to work, Naomi felt a weight on her shoulders. She had always known that standing up for what was right came with consequences. But now, she was truly feeling the heat. She was starting to understand how deep the corruption ran. The powerful figures she had once worked with were now the ones trying to block her progress, using their political influence to protect their own interests. It was clear to Naomi now. This wasn't just about an apology. It wasn't about exposing a single wrong. It was about shaking the foundations of the system that had allowed these kinds of abuses to fester for so long. Later that evening, Naomi found herself standing in front of the large glass windows of her office at the Pentagon, looking out over the city. The lights of Washington, D.C. were twinkling below, but Naomi wasn't focused on the beauty of the city. Her thoughts were consumed by what was coming next. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her team. Naomi quickly unlocked the screen. "General, the airline is making a public statement. They're claiming that the accusations against them are false and that they've been a target of unfair attacks. They've filed an official grievance against the investigation." Naomi smirked as she read the message. Of course, they were fighting back. They had everything to lose, but Naomi wasn't about to back down. She wasn't done. She tapped out a quick response. "Let them talk. We have the truth on our side." A few days later, Naomi was back in front of the cameras, her team by her side. This time, it wasn't just about a single press conference. It was about a national conversation. Naomi had made it clear that the airline would be held accountable, but now she needed to ensure that this wasn't just a headline for the day. This needed to be the start of a larger movement, one that could spark real, lasting change. The press conference was packed. The room was buzzing with reporters eager to hear from Naomi. As she stepped up to the podium, Naomi could feel the tension in the air. This time, it was more than just the media. There were political figures in the room, all eyes trained on her, waiting for her next move. Naomi adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. She was ready. This was the moment that would define everything. "Thank you all for being here," Naomi began, her voice strong and clear. "I'm not here today to talk about me. I'm here to talk about the systemic issues that have been allowed to persist in this country. We are at a crossroads, and it's time to make sure we do what's right, not just for those of us in positions of power, but for everyone who has been silenced, ignored, and devalued." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Let's be clear, this isn't just about one airline. This is about every company that profits off the backs of people they don't care to acknowledge. This is about the people who have been denied the same opportunities, the same respect, and the same treatment as everyone else. The room was silent, the reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Naomi could feel the intensity building around her. This was the moment. She wasn't going to back down. She was going to keep fighting until the job was done. "I didn't come here to make a point about one individual company," Naomi continued. "I'm here because I've spent my life fighting for justice. And this fight isn't just mine. It's for every person who's ever been overlooked or discriminated against, whether in the military, in business, or in life. We will not be ignored." As Naomi left the press conference, she was swarmed by reporters asking questions, their voices merging into a cacophony of sound. She ignored them, walking purposefully toward the exit. The fight was just beginning. Later that night, Naomi sat alone in her office, the weight of the world on her shoulders. The pressure was mounting. She was becoming a target, but she couldn't stop. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been subjected to injustice, to the systems that had profited off their pain and their silence. She stared at the documents on her desk. More leaked financial records. More proof of the corruption she had known was there all along. The pieces were falling into place. Naomi picked up her phone again, tapping out a message to her assistant. "Prepare the next phase. We can't stop. The momentum is on our side." Her assistant's quick response came back almost instantly. "Understood, General. We'll be ready." Naomi stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city again. It was late, and the streets below were quiet. But in her mind, the battle was far from over. She had started a fire, and now there was no turning back. At the end of the day, Naomi Carrington wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for a future where every person, regardless of their race or background, had the same opportunity to thrive. But this wasn't going to be an easy road. There would be more battles, more adversaries, more obstacles in her path. Naomi was ready for all of it. The system had failed her, but she would make sure it never failed anyone else again. What do you think Naomi's next step should be? Should she continue to focus on the airline, or expand her fight to other industries? Let me know in the comments. The pressure had been building for weeks. Naomi Carrington had become a household name, not just because of the viral incident on the airplane, but because of the way she had handled it. Her words, her decisions, and her actions had set in motion a tidal wave of change. But that wave was threatening to crash down on her, and Naomi knew the next few hours could determine everything. She sat in her office at the Pentagon, staring at the reports that had been flooding in. The airline was under full investigation, and the board members were scrambling to contain the damage. The financial losses were staggering: $5 billion in stock value, massive fallout from political leaders, and public outrage that seemed to be growing every day. Naomi had expected backlash, but the intensity of it was staggering. There were whispers of political figures calling her a radical, Others were questioning her methods, wondering if she was too dangerous, too unpredictable for someone in her position. She'd known the risks when she made that first phone call to the Pentagon, but the more they tried to push back, the more determined she became. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The fight was no longer just about the airline. It had become personal, about her reputation, her career, and most importantly, her ability to bring about the changes she believed in. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Naomi looked up to see Colonel Mosley standing in the doorway, his expression serious. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "General, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What now?" "The airline is fighting back harder than we anticipated," Mosley continued. "They've called in some big names, lobbyists, lawyers, and they're getting political figures involved. They're trying to paint you as the villain. Some are even suggesting that you've overstepped your authority. There's talk of a counter-investigation to question the military's involvement." Naomi's fists clenched. She had known this was coming. They would try to turn the tables, paint her as the enemy, but she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice firm. Mosley hesitated for a moment before answering. "We can't just keep pushing them into a corner. We need to be strategic. It's time to turn the narrative. Instead of them attacking you, we turn the focus back on the airline's systemic issues. We need to take control of the conversation, make it about accountability, and force them to answer for the corruption and racism that has been allowed to thrive." Naomi nodded slowly. "I agree. But it's not just about the airline anymore. This is bigger. We need to start bringing in allies. Every industry, every sector where these same practices are happening. We expose them all. We don't stop until the entire system is held accountable." Mosley met her gaze, his respect for Naomi evident. "We'll back you, General, but be prepared. You're making enemies at the highest levels. This fight is going to get even messier." Naomi didn't flinch. "Let them come. I'm not going anywhere." Later that day, Naomi addressed the nation once again. She stood before the cameras, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. She was no longer just talking about one airline. She was addressing a system that had allowed corruption, discrimination, and inequality to flourish unchecked. "Good evening," Naomi began, her voice steady. "What we're seeing is not just an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger problem, a problem that reaches into every corner of our society, from our military contracts to our corporations. The truth is clear. Racism, corruption, and discrimination have been allowed to thrive unchecked, and it's time we hold the systems responsible." The press room was silent as Naomi's words echoed. She wasn't here for apologies or half-measures. She was here to dismantle the systems that protected the powerful and left the marginalized in the shadows. "The time for silence is over," she continued. "We will not let anyone, no matter their position or power, get away with exploiting others. The airline is just the beginning. We will continue to uncover the truth, and we will hold every entity accountable." Naomi's resolve had never been clearer. She was no longer just an individual fighting for justice. She was leading a movement. And as the battle escalated, she knew that the future of the system depended on what she did next. The hearing room was silent, almost reverent, as General Naomi Carrington entered. Every camera lens turned. Every whisper stopped. She wasn't wearing her uniform today, but her presence still held the weight of a five-star general. Her tailored suit was sharp, her gaze sharper. This wasn't a trial. This was a reckoning. The Congressional Committee had been called to determine whether Naomi had overstepped her authority when she made that infamous call to the Pentagon. The airline's legal team had spent weeks feeding narratives into the press, calling her actions impulsive, radical, even dangerous. But Naomi wasn't rattled. She hadn't made that call as a personal vendetta. She had made it as a decorated officer, a black woman who'd spent decades serving a country that still couldn't guarantee her basic dignity on a flight. As she took the stand, a hush fell over the room. Naomi looked each committee member in the eye before speaking. "You want to know why I made that call?" she began, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Because when a system allows a decorated officer to be slapped across the face, literally and figuratively, and does nothing about it, someone has to act. That someone was me." There was no anger in her voice, just truth, clean, sharp, and unshakable. Outside the chamber, the ripple effects of Naomi's testimony were already being felt. The Department of Transportation announced an emergency review of all federal transportation contracts. The Defense Ethics Committee voted unanimously to re-examine its vendor vetting protocols, and within 48 hours, the White House confirmed that 4 major airlines had been temporarily suspended from bidding on any federal contracts pending further review, including the one that started it all. And then came the real blow. The $2 billion defense mobility deal the airline had been counting on was officially revoked. The Pentagon issued a statement citing ethical concerns and failure to maintain standards of equity and inclusion in federal partnerships. The contract was redirected to a veteran-owned, minority-led aviation firm based out of Atlanta. The airline's stock nosedived. Board members resigned. And as reporters scrambled to cover the corporate collapse, one name stayed in every headline: Naomi Carrington. But Naomi wasn't celebrating. She was in her office, reviewing the next round of findings from the Military Civil Oversight Task Force she'd quietly formed. This wasn't a moment for victory laps. It was a blueprint for reform. Mosley walked in, holding the latest internal memo from the White House. "They want you to co-chair the new National Council on Equity and Federal Contracting," he said. "Direct appointment, full backing." Naomi took a breath, steady but waited. "Tell them I'll do it, but only if it includes binding power, not just recommendations. If we're going to fix this, we're doing it for real." Back at the hearing room, a young cadet who had come to observe approached Naomi quietly. He looked nervous, gripping the edge of his cap. "My mom showed me the clip," he said, "of you on that plane. She said she'd never seen someone handle disrespect with that kind of dignity." Naomi smiled. "Dignity isn't weakness, cadet. It's discipline. It's knowing when to stand tall and when to strike back with the weight of every truth behind you." And just like that, she walked out, unapologetic, unshaken, and fully in command. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the end of an era, one where silence was expected and injustice went unchecked. Naomi had cracked the foundation, and now the rebuild was hers to lead. The headlines had already etched Naomi Carrington's name into the public memory, but the real shift wasn't in the news. It was in the culture. Quietly, decisively, the system began to bend. Within weeks of the revoked $2 billion contract, a wave of reviews swept across multiple sectors. Agencies across federal and state levels opened audits into airline practices, military-supplier relations, and discriminatory behavior in service sectors. Naomi hadn't just stopped a deal. She had kicked open a door that had been locked for decades. But even as the world buzzed around her, Naomi stayed focused. She wasn't here for a moment. She was here for impact. Inside the Pentagon briefing room, Naomi stood before a group of civilian and military leaders. A large screen behind her displayed a new initiative, the Carrington Standard, a policy framework for equity, accountability, and anti-discrimination in all federal partnerships. "This isn't about punishment," she said firmly, pointing to the data on screen. "It's about prevention. It's about setting standards high enough that dignity is protected before harm is even possible." The Carrington Standard included mandatory anti-bias certification for all companies working with federal contracts, anonymous employee review portals, and quarterly ethical compliance reports, measured not just by numbers but by behavior. This wasn't cosmetic reform. This was structural. Elsewhere, ripple effects continued. Sky Freedom Airlines, the company whose flight started it all, was delisted from multiple major investment portfolios. 4 of its board members stepped down. Its CEO, after resisting for weeks, appeared at a live-streamed press conference to announce his resignation and publicly endorse the Carrington Standard. And in a moment that felt like poetry, the company's interim CEO was a black female colonel-turned-executive who had once been passed over for a senior aviation role due to lack of fit. But not everyone welcomed the change. Whispers grew louder in back channels, some calling Naomi a threat to military neutrality, others labeling her too political. She knew it would come. Systemic change always invited backlash. Still, she didn't waver. In private, she met with younger servicewomen, many of whom told her that her story had changed how they saw their futures. They no longer felt invisible. They felt seen, protected, represented. One young Air Force cadet put it simply, "You didn't just make a call, you made a path." Naomi's legacy wasn't about the slap. It wasn't even about the phone call. It was about what happened after. She turned humiliation into policy, silence into accountability, and for every woman who had ever been told to sit down, to stay quiet, or to wait her turn, Naomi Carrington stood up and changed the rules. The world hadn't seen the last of her. It had just learned to listen. 6 months later, the air was cooler in Washington, the kind that whispers of endings and beginnings. Naomi Carrington stood on the tarmac of Andrews Air Force Base, not as a victim, not even as a general, but as an architect of something much larger than herself. The Carrington Standard had not only been adopted across all defense-related contracts, it was now being implemented by 3 of the country's major transportation agencies and studied internationally. Over 60 companies had rewritten their internal policies to align with its code. What began as an act of disrespect had evolved into a national benchmark for dignity. As she prepared to board a military transport plane bound for Germany, where she was scheduled to speak at a NATO summit on ethical command leadership, her aide jogged up, holding a tablet. "Ma'am, there's been a request. Sky Freedom's new CEO would like to meet with you. She wants to officially sign the full equity partnership clause in person, with you." Naomi didn't blink. She looked across the airfield, where another jet with the Sky Freedom logo was taxiing quietly toward a hangar. "Tell her I'll meet her on neutral ground," Naomi replied calmly. "But not as a formality, only if it's real." Her words carried no malice, just that familiar sharp clarity she'd been known for her entire career. Inside the quiet lounge where the meeting was set, the new CEO, Colonel Alicia Granger, stood and extended a hand. No cameras, no press. Just 2 women who understood both chain of command and the weight of being underestimated. "I wasn't ready for this seat," Alicia admitted. "But I'm ready to earn it and to rebuild something better." Naomi accepted the handshake. "Then let's build it right." They signed the final document. A new clause, binding, enforceable, and monitored quarterly, ensuring hiring equity, zero-tolerance discrimination policies, and whistleblower protections across all flights operated under federal contract. The signature wasn't just ink, it was history. Later, as Naomi boarded her flight, a young black girl in uniform, clearly new to the service, caught her eye. She whispered to a fellow passenger, "That's her. That's General Carrington." Naomi smiled as she passed, pausing just long enough to speak softly but clearly. "Carry yourself like the world is watching, because someday it will be." She took her seat near the front, looked out the window at the rising sun, and let herself exhale. Not in relief, but in readiness, because her first call had changed everything. But her legacy? That was just beginning to take off. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, share it, and tell us where you're watching from. Justice travels faster when the world listens.